Michelle Marie McGrath.
Welcome to today's episode of Unclassified Woman, and today I'm really happy to be talking to Claire Baker. Claire is an Australian women's coach and writer currently based in London. Through her popular blog, ebooks, online courses and live workshops, Claire teaches self-care, creative rekindling, how to live life aligned with your menstrual cycle and being kind to yourself and the world. Claire believes in less stress and more flow and dark chocolate, of course, and knows that working with our natural rhythms is the missing key when it comes to women's wellness. She'll have you throwing out the scales, booking the flight, launching the blog, and falling back in love with your life. Now, this is a great conversation on one of my favourite topics, which is about really harnessing that creative wisdom within our bodies that's available to all of us when we really align ourselves with our natural rhythm. And we're going to be talking very much about the power of the menstrual cycle today. And so I really hope you enjoy this conversation and pick up some great tips about how you can apply some of this knowledge in your own life on a day-to-day basis. And I highly recommend you check out Claire at thisislifeblood.com. Enjoy. Hi Claire, so great to have you here today.
Hello, Michelle. I'm really, really honoured. Thank you so much for having me.
So really looking forward to talking about your work with working with the seasons, with the menstrual cycle, and, you know, all of these things related that are just so interesting and so important for us to educate ourselves.
Yes, so fun to talk about as well.
Yeah, and so in terms of your interest and working very consciously with the menstrual cycle and what that entails, did that interest come because you experienced problems in that area, or is it something that you'd always been curious about?
Mm-hmm. No, I certainly wasn't curious about the menstrual cycle at all growing up. Nope. No, sorry. I mean, I only had a natural cycle for 12 months before I went on the contraceptive pill. So it was just kind of a nothing thing. I feel like it just had no real relevance, in my life at all. So there certainly wasn't a curiosity. It was just something that happened once a month, you know, just there was a bleed and then that was kind of it. So I never felt like I had any problems with it growing up. However, after 10 years on the contraceptive pill, also remembering that when you're on the pill, you're not actually experiencing a natural cycle. So I wasn't actually experiencing a menstrual cycle. Really, at the age of 26, when I came off the pill, I hadn't ovulated since I was 15 years old. And at that time, I'd only ovulated for 12 months. And again, it was those early days of menstruating when your cycle's still kind of balancing itself out anyway. So I kind of got to 26 and came off the pill and nothing happened for 12 months. No, didn't bleed, nothing, just nothing happened. And so I obviously freaked out quite a bit about what I had essentially kind of done for this 10 years of manipulating my cycle, if I'd really caused some long-term damage. And I think the worst thing you can do in any situation like this is Google things, but of course that's what I did. And just found some really scary stuff. So, it was definitely, I guess, something that having troubles with it that sparked my interest in it, because I just dove into everything that I could find. And I found support in the form of my herbalist and Chinese medicine practitioner in Perth, and more credible sources online, and I just sought advice from people who knew what they were talking about. And I just went to work trying to understand what the menstrual cycle really even was. I just didn't really even know what it did. I mean, of course, I knew that its prime, function, I suppose, biologically is to create a human. But other than that, I really didn't understand anything about my hormones or what was happening. And I was diagnosed in that time with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and as well as obviously like post-pill amenorrhea, which is essentially just not bleeding after being on the contraceptive pill. And these things are really, I found, were much more common than I had thought.
Very.
I found a lot of other women, who had experienced or were experiencing similar things. So yes, it was certainly having trouble and having frustration around my cycle, and a lot of fear, to be honest. I was actually quite terrified for most of that 12 months that it might never come back. But it did, it did. And in the years since, it's been just such a gift. But at the time, I didn't look at it like that way at all. It was scary.
No, of course not. And I think from what I've heard from many women as well, that can be quite a normal thing, can't it? That it takes a while for your body to regulate itself again with a cycle. And I guess in terms of time frames for that, it's different for every woman.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some women had told me that they had, it had come back almost immediately. Some women I know have taken up to 2 years for it to come back. It is totally unique, and it doesn't, at least from who I've spoken to, seem to have much correlation with the duration of actually being on the pill. It's just so unique to everybody. But for me, it was really a lot about learning how to replenish my reserves and rest and give my body the resources that it needed to ovulate again, because essentially that's, what it needed to do was just remember how to do it and to trust that it knew what to do. And I really had let go of a lot of control around trying to, force it to do what I wanted it to do, because the thing with it, with our cycles is that they are just, they're on their own process. We don't every month sit around thinking and telling, we don't tell our body to ovulate. We don't do anything to make it ovulate. It just does it. And it has this beautiful creative process of its own. And I really had to let go of this idea that there was something that I could really do to make it happen. It was much more about just resting, giving myself what I needed, taking care of myself, and just trusting that it would happen when it was meant to happen. It was basically 12 months, but it was such a powerful year as well of learning.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, it's crazy really, isn't it? Like, our menstrual cycle is a sign that our body's working as it should be. And yet there's so much stigma still attached to it, so much shame, so much embarrassment, even from the way that we're taught about it. I mean, I know I went to an all-girls school, and I think it was something that was mentioned very briefly in terms of, you're looking at reproduction system with animals, and then I remember it being quite a brief section, and again, something that people were really embarrassed about. And again, even, I don't know how your mum talked to you about it, but I just remember my mum saying, oh, look, here's a little booklet from Tampax, which was, the tampon company that was kind of very well known. And, you can use that, or you can use pads. And that was it was this very brief, embarrassed conversation. And so I think, so much of the way that young girls are spoken to or not spoken to a lot of the time about this topic, it really then paves the way for the experience that they have.
Oh, it cultivates deep shame.
Yeah.
Deep shame for sure. I was a bit of a brat, really. I purposely didn't tell my mum because she was a very private child, and she really just never understood how much space I really needed. And so I purposely didn't tell her because I just wanted to keep it to myself. And I just had girlfriends explain things to me, how to do things. And it's a conversation that we've had as we've gotten older. I didn't feel the need to apologize necessarily, to just look at the dynamics of our relationship at that time and why I felt like I wanted to keep that as a secret from her on purpose. And now we chat, about this stuff really openly all the time, and it's really lovely. She came to one of my workshops in Australia actually when I was teaching last year, and so now it's been an opportunity for us to talk about things in a really open way. But at that age, at 14 or 15, I was so unwilling to talk to her about anything related to my body. Oh, totally. And the deep shame, really deep shame.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant time, is it? Those hormones are all over the place, and we're like, oh, what is going on with my body? And that
Mhm.
very sort of a lot of self-conscious behavior of all of these changes, and you just really don't know what's going on. So, no,
Mhm.
it's not an easy time at all. And it's not really celebrated as this, rite of passage, really, that transition phase, moving from a young girl into a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly no conversation. There's no really any celebration around that. I get a lot of emails from women who are mothers asking if my work is really relevant for them to be able to give to their daughter. And to be honest, it's not really that. Teens aren't exactly my focus area, but I think that they need to be somebody's, because it is so important that at that age, when it's such an awkward time of
Yeah, it
life as
really
you're,
is.
blossoming, and it's really hard. I really think I don't regret the years that I was on the pill, because I just think it is what it is. However, I wonder how much more self-awareness and self-esteem and just confidence in who I was, and how much more of that juicy stuff I may have had I not taken the contraceptive pill at such an early age, and had I been able to experience what it meant to have natural cycles throughout my late teens and early to mid 20s, and to be able to really understand what it meant. I just feel like that is a huge thing that we sacrifice when we're taking the contraceptive pill.
Yeah, and after long-term usage, it's understandable that many women do feel very disconnected from their natural cycle, and they're not sure what to expect, especially like as yourself, somebody who might have been taking it for a decade or more, for example. So for somebody who is considering coming off the pill and they want to start reattuning themselves to their body's natural cycle, what are some of the things that they should expect to experience as part of that process? Have you got any advice for somebody that is really wanting to stop taking it, but they're nervous or anxious about how that might be for them?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest concerns coming off the pill was that my skin would break out. I had suffered from hormonal acne for like 13 years, and I was really worried that it would, and actually had been my experience when I had tried to come off it in my 20s, that my skin would just continue to break out. So I was quite concerned that would happen again. I really did as much as I could before I came off it to take care of my hormones. So that really meant things like cutting back on sugar and alcohol, and getting more sleep, just generally like my diet, looking at eating better fats and proteins and more whole foods, and just trying to clean things up a little bit. Another great idea is to take like a fish oil supplement, vitamins and minerals, and just to try, take the absolute best care of yourself, so that when you transition off it, your body's, like I was talking about, having those resources. It's got the resources that it needs to be able to shift now into this new state of being, because it is quite different. It's a different state, and if it has been a really long time that your body hasn't been naturally cycling, it could take some time. So patience is important, and I love Chinese medicine. It's been extremely helpful for me in this area of my life, and I know for many other women. So it's all about building qi, and again building energy and reserve, so that your body has what it needs to do, what it knows to do. It knows what it needs to do. Your body is so much more, more wise than we are, and we give it credit for. Often we just really need to give it the space and energy that it needs to do its job. So for me, Chinese medicine, and just taking extra good care of yourself and being patient. As frustrating as that can sound when you're in that place, it's so possible to come off the pill and to have a really seamless transition. I know many women who have done that.
Yeah, and so obviously one of your major focuses is really working within the seasons that occur within that cycle. And so can you give us a little bit of an overview about the cycle, the seasons within it, and, how that kind of relates to different types of activities, how we may be feeling? in each of those phases, for example? Because I know that we're all familiar with the PMT phase, where often it can be a very kind of intense time. Obviously not for everybody, but for some people, they really suffer at that time where, you know, you can feel very irrational, as we all, well, not looking at myself in particular, but, you know, we can feel like a bit cray-cray at that time.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm on day 22 at the moment, and like, you should have seen me yesterday. I was the most distracted, dissatisfied person on the planet. It was, oh man, it's a funny time. So when I was really learning about the cycle in that year and in the years that have followed, the first place I think it's always important to start is understanding the biological phases. And, you know, we can break the cycle down into lots of different ways. But essentially, if we were to say that the first half of the cycle, which is from day 1 of bleeding up until ovulation, is the follicular phase. And that takes you right through, you know, through menstruation and bleeding, through the follicle developing right up until the release of the egg. And then you've got ovulation when your body is then ovulating, the egg is released. We then move down into the luteal phase, which is then the second half of the cycle. And this takes us down as the matured egg then disintegrates if we don't become pregnant, and the uterine lining begins to leave the body in preparation for menses. So in that time, you know, hormones are doing all kinds of things in the first half of the cycle, in that follicular phase. Estrogen is increasing at a really like lovely rate, and we feel quite good. We get a really nice bump of testosterone as well around ovulation, and, you know, hormones are really building up to that peak of the cycle and at the middle phase, right at that mid-cycle point. Then we pivot. And if we haven't become pregnant, as the egg, that matured egg, is then disintegrating, estrogen and progesterone do all kinds of things in that second half. And so we go from this really lovely, like, you know, progressive, like gradually moving up to suddenly, you know, estrogen drops, progesterone rises again, and then they both decline. So it can kind of be this like funny little dance that we can feel right after ovulating in that post-ovulatory phase, before things then basically just decline right down towards menses. So
in more ways than one sometimes.
Yeah, oh man, and I'm like really feeling it. I'm like, you know, I can really tell, okay, so I've had my second little estrogen bump, cool, now things are definitely moving south. So, you know, that can be a really helpful way of looking at it. And for some people that really works, is understanding the hormonal shifts and changes, and that's great. I have a kind of brain, and I think that a lot of women can relate to this, is that I understand things through like metaphor and symbols and archetypes and patterns and colors and music and all kinds of things that just help me to connect to ideas. So when I first began to understand this notion of the seasons related to our cycle, it just blew my mind, because it just made so much sense. So if we were to then apply the seasons to what I just very briefly explained around the cycle, the winter phase, so thinking of season winter, is when we're bleeding. And like the season, it's a dark time. Our hormones are literally rock bottom, right? Like they are, you know, that day 1, our hormones are at the lowest level that they will be for the entire cyclic month. And so it can feel like that winter energy where you just want to like hibernate inside and curl up on, you know, in a blanket and not do anything or see anyone. It's a yin phase. It's very much a time for introspection and time alone and solitude. Then we move, you know, into spring, which is interesting because we're currently experiencing the transition into spring here in the UK at the moment. And I'm really learning to understand the cyclic spring, if you will, in a really interesting way, because I'm actually having a bit of difficulty with this spring at the moment. I kind of want it to still be winter. And it's funny, I'm excited by the sunshine, and I'm excited about coming out into the world and wearing less clothes and like being seen. But there's also a sense of, there's also a bit of awkwardness around that as well. I don't quite feel ready, and I feel a little bit self-conscious. And so this is interesting, because when we look at the spring phase, that's really a lot of that energy as well. It's like we're coming out and it's exciting, and everyone knows that feeling of leaving the period cave, you know, once you've stopped bleeding. you feel that like injection of energy, and it feels really great. But it can also be sometimes a bit of an anxious period as well. And I have noticed that within myself too, is that my inner critic can kind of go a little wild in that spring phase with all the things that I have to do.
Yeah.
And we're moving into a yang phase, but that transition from yin to yang isn't always super seamless. So that's been something I've kind of been exploring lately. But essentially spring is certainly a light phase. It's about coming back out into the world and stepping back into that yang energy. It's not the most yang season though, and that would take us into summer, which is the highest yang season of the summer, and which is when we're ovulating. So that's when, like I said, estrogen and testosterone are really nice and high. We feel quite strong physically, perhaps even also emotionally. We feel quite strong, and it's very much summer. You know, being outside, moving, being with people. It's like the season again. We want to socialize. We want to play, and so it can be a really fun energy, really strong energy. And then we move into autumn, which, you know, as I described, we have shift in hormones and things kind of shift up quite a bit before then declining, and it mirrors the season in such a beautiful way if we think about autumn and the trees losing their leaves and falling to the ground, enriching the earth for the next cycle, and things become really rich and really lovely. But it's quite a dark time, and it's also a yin phase. It's also a yin season. So again, we have that interesting pivot point from the yang energy to the yin, and sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable. It's often those 2 points sometimes in the cycle, I think, which can bring up interesting feelings because our energy is shifting a lot. So then we move from autumn. Once we've then, you know, really we're waning, we can then move into winter when we then actually release through menstruation. And we just move through that beautiful cycle of every single month. It's incredible.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting, and it is great to have those metaphors of the season, and especially if you are in Europe and, you know, it's more defined there than in Australia, for example. So it would be interesting to be having that, you know, very clearly delineated experience of seeing that physically around you.
Oh, yes. I'm just loving the seasons in the Northern Hemisphere because exactly that it's teaching me so much about myself. Looking at the way I'm interacting with these seasons and watching them change. And while, you know, particularly here in London, obviously the weather can be somewhat sporadic, but even watching, you know, one day it's beautifully blue, like right now the sky is blue, it's lovely, it's beautiful, but, you know, tomorrow it's meant to be raining and it's going to be cold again. And the weather doesn't change in this necessarily in this really like smooth way either. It's up and down too all of the time, and I think that's important to recognize as well, is that it's a very feminine, creative energy and process. So are we, and so some days we will feel up and great and lively, and then the next day we might not, and that's okay.
Well, that's right, and that's the beauty of being human, isn't it? And having this access to a wide spectrum of feelings and emotions, and I guess the menstrual cycle is a really specific way that we experience that as women. So it's really a reminder to really come back into that innate nature that we've got, where it is those ebbs and flows all the time. And so how would you then, Claire, because obviously there's the feminine archetypes as well, and if we look at those traditional ones of like the triple goddess, how do you then relate those to the cycle?
So this is wonderful as well. So if we think about the seasons as being, say, like the cycle of the year, right? We move through 4 seasons throughout a year in the external world around us. We also then move through basically the life cycle of a woman every single month as well, in a way. And so it gives us an opportunity to play with all of these different sides to ourselves. If we look at spring is like the spring of our lives. It's like the maiden or the virgin years. So if you were thinking about, you know, the archetype for spring, it's a very young, naive,
innocent.
often innocent, playful energy. And so that's a really fun thing a really fun archetype that we can play with around that phase of our cycle is that beautiful maiden archetype. And that might mean looking back at your own maiden years and having a chat with your inner child and asking her, is there anything she feels particularly stuck about? Or perhaps does she have any advice for you as well? I find that mine often tells me to just play a little bit more and not to take things so seriously. And so that's really beautiful that we can explore that and to try things that we might not try when we have that really lovely sort of more like left brain. It's more of a masculine energy. It's a bit more logical. We might feel more rational and productive, say, than we may 2 weeks later in our autumn. So that can be a really fun time to work on projects and to really work into our energy is also for ourselves in that phase. Think about a maiden, she's kind of self-absorbed because her life is very much about her at that point. She doesn't have really responsibilities in the world, just very young and fresh and like you said, innocent. So that can be fun to play with that and to work on projects and to plant seeds and move towards things that are for us. And that's really lovely to be able to take that time each month. I've had women tell me who are mothers that they love that week because it gives them an opportunity to play with that maiden energy again, because it's something they feel like they've had to leave behind, becoming a mother, or they just don't get time for anymore. Whereas that week they give themselves permission to just do the things they want to do for themselves and to feel good about that. And I love that. I think that's really special.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's nice. So then we move into summer, which is the archetype of the mother. And interestingly, I've had quite a few questions. I'm running my course Flow at the moment, which is about journaling a menstrual cycle. And this week we've been looking at summer and the mother. And quite a few women in my group who aren't mothers have, and I feel this as well, have kind of experienced more of a connection with an archetype around like a sex goddess. And even as one woman in my workshops has called it before, slut archetype, really exploring more of that sacred slut or the sex goddess or this very like sexual energy, because again, we're ovulating, right? So our body wants to make a baby. And so naturally it's sending us these messages that, like, let's make love, let's explore this. And so that's been interesting as well, of looking at the mother simultaneously looking at this like sex goddess archetype too. And it is about other people, and it is about creating with other people and connecting. And so that might mean connecting as a mother and nurturing children, or it could mean connecting with a partner and nurturing a relationship in that sense, or even with friends and family. It is certainly an energy around being with others, which again is very much that summer energy. It's very yang, and it's very much about connecting with other people. There's so much with the mother, as you know, Michelle, the mother line that you can explore.
There's no end to it, is there? Gosh.
Oh my gosh. And there's so much that you can explore in that summer phase when it comes to how you feel about being a mother. What's your relationship with your mother like, or hers before hers before hers? And I really love looking at I feel very comforted when I think about the ancient, like, ancestral line, my mother's cycle, her mother's before her, and it's just something about that I find really rich.
And accessing those gifts that are all within us at a genetic level in our DNA. It's that thing of our ancestors are within us, in our cells.
Yes. And so that's such a lovely opportunity, I think, at that point in the cycle to connect with that. I find. Yeah.
And do you then, I suppose, the mothering you were just saying as well, I guess, is that then looking at mothering yourself, or is that more inwardly focused? So would that be more later on? Like saying like that thing around mothering and mothering other people. So when it comes to mothering yourself, for example, like in that self-care nurturing, I guess that's more internally focused. So would you say that comes later on?
Yeah, I feel like that for me anyway. I can only speak to my experience here. I feel like that certainly comes would come later on, but possibly I would say, actually, if I'm thinking about it now, in the second half of summer. So summer's really interesting because it actually has two elements, and this is, again, we've got the seasons, we've got the archetypes, and we've got elements. So each season is also connected with an element, and summer has two. So you've got fire and you've got earth. So we move from first half, which is fire, then we transition into earth, which is the second half. And this is when we're experiencing that post-ovulatory dance, I call it, when estrogen and progesterone are shifting up. So around, like, say, day 17 or 18, a lot of women do feel this drop. And so potentially, around that drop is when I certainly I really, really make an effort to connect more with that earth element and to rein it in, I guess, with how much I'm giving to other people, and to mother myself more in that time, and play in a more of a nurturing energy for myself rather than giving that to others. Absolutely. And for some women, particularly if they are someone who gives all the time, summer might be the best, the perfect opportunity to direct that energy to herself, to purely just focus on mothering herself. If the imbalance is that it's often about her giving to others, then, the menstrual cycle gives us an opportunity to explore all of these different energies in a way that is best suited for us. And so for someone, it might not be about being with other people at all. It could be purely just her mothering herself and bringing that back into balance.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you bring in those, like, elements there with fire, and then as it goes up and then down into the earth, because it could be that, if it's all very external for the first part of it, and then it's about bringing that focus back. So it really, it's so beautiful the way it mirrors all of the different parts of the seasons. I mean, I just love it. You go, like, there are no mistakes like this in nature, the way that things flow and are created. These are like the building blocks, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we're so deeply connected to nature and the natural world. And our cycle gives us an opportunity to really zone in on that relationship, which for a lot of women is what so many women are craving, that connection with the natural world. So it's been a real gift for me to understand the seasons, and particularly the elements in that sense, is just recognizing how I can connect with nature every single day of my cycle. There's an opportunity. And it's transient, it all changes. It's something new the next day.
Or the next hour.
Exactly, or the next hour. Yeah. Oh, totally. So then if we were then to move into autumn and speaking about that archetype there, it's interesting. We then look at the wild woman here. And so this is a bit of a step out, say, from the Trinity. And I find this really interesting because this is, again, a week of the month that we're not often really taught to enjoy, and often premenstrual women are labeled as, like, demonic or crazy or hormonal, whatever. There's all kinds of awful things we've all been labeled with, or even labeled ourselves with, in that particular week. But the wild woman archetype is so, oh man, she has so many lessons for us to learn about being instinctual and trusting ourselves, and, like I was talking about, being connected to nature and honoring ourselves and having boundaries, and really good personal boundaries. And so if we haven't been telling the truth or expressing ourselves fully in other phases of the cycle, well, this is the week that it's definitely going to come out. We're naturally feeling less tolerant as hormones are dropping. We don't have that resilience and that patience that we may have had in our summer or even spring phases, and we don't really feel like giving so much to other people. It is much more about returning inwards, that yin energy, and connecting with ourselves. And the wild woman is deeply creative and intuitive, and it's a very powerful archetype and very helpful, I think, for women who do struggle with, premenstrual tension and symptoms, to have a figure that we can seek guidance from, basically, and be our muse for that week. And for me, she's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, what you mentioned, boundaries, that's such a huge one, isn't it? Because during that time, if there have been things that we've been previously ignoring, then often those things come back to bite you. during that time, and where you've not said no to things that you maybe wanted to really, and then you're getting to that time where you are feeling less patient, less tolerant, and then it becomes very apparent.
Oh my gosh, yes. And if we were to look at it from a Chinese medicine perspective as well, in this phase, like I was speaking about earlier, hormones are shifting up quite a lot and then declining. So the liver is processing quite a lot. It's processing these hormones and releasing them from our body and working with what's happening. And our liver is actually associated with the emotion of anger.
Yeah.
And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're still doing too much, giving too much, even, having foods or drinks that also doesn't support us, so not getting enough sleep so that our body and our liver isn't able to be able to do what it's designed to do and to be in balance, then guess what? This emotion of anger can come out in really in unhealthy ways if we don't feel safe to express it at other times of the month, then it can get quite intense in that premenstrual week.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of expression, creativity, sexuality, these are two of the main themes that are really connected into our sacral and our menstrual cycle. And so often really focusing on that creative expression in some way is actually a really healthy thing to support the menstrual cycle, isn't it? Because it's all so intertwined. And so I know that you work very consciously with that, because obviously with your writing as well. And so for somebody who is really wanting to tap into that creative essence more, do you think that that's a way for them to really connect with that, working with the seasons, working with the archetypes, becoming more aligned and attuned to their feelings at those different times? What would you recommend if somebody's really wanting to delve into that more closely?
The menstrual cycle is designed to create life, right?
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly powerful process in and of itself. And whether or not we want to have children, we can use it every single month to create whatever we like. And so I've been exploring these ideas of, setting intentions for ourselves in winter and then taking action on it in that spring energy, seeing things come to fruition in summer and then using that truth-telling autumn energy to then edit and reflect and then start things again, which is essentially the creative process in and of itself, is bringing things to life in that way. So it is such a powerful way for women to connect with that. I think that if someone wanted to get started exploring her creativity, the seasons of autumn and winter are probably, I would say, the best places to start. Many women tell me that they feel more connected to their journaling or their writing or art making and expressing themselves through their clothes or around the house during those particularly autumn and winter phases when they let themselves do it. So maybe it's creating like a really lovely drawing or art project or something kind of crafty that you do when you're bleeding. I like to make things with my hands or just draw, not for the product. I mean, it doesn't really look like anything great necessarily, but just for the process of enjoying it. It's meditative. And when we're in that winter energy, it is a very still and dark energy, and it's that crone energy. It's very wise and intuitive and tapped in. And so connecting with that and the water element of winter, letting things just flow and be as they are, can be a really, really powerful way. Dance, dance, particularly in autumn and winter, like just turning some tunes on and just moving and just letting it be what it is. That's a really beautiful way to tap into creativity as well. Saying that, I find also that my spring and summer phases then really complement that really rich sort of intuitive creative depth that I have in those yin phases by actually being prolific and getting things done. So if you then wanted to use that creative energy to actually bring something to life and have a real actual manifestation of something, then that's spring and summer are perfect for that, because you've got the energy to take action on any ideas that may have come to you for projects or, expressions or ways of being in that winter and autumn phase. You can actually take, action on it and make it happen. So it's that feminine and masculine balance.
Yeah, and obviously working with both because, well, we need both, don't we, for different types of activities. And I was just thinking, like, obviously creativity is such a loaded topic for so many of us who've had maybe incidents at school in our childhood where we started to be compared against each other, and then maybe we came to think, oh, you know, I'm not very good at this. I was just thinking about the best time to explore. If, say, somebody starts to explore this and thinks, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to do some journaling, or I'm going to try some painting and really go into this for myself and for some self-discovery. If they then find that, like, you know, memories start to come up from an experience that they had, and some of these beliefs that can come up that aren't very productive or supportive, when's the best way to kind of explore that, do you think, in the cycle for maximum healing?
So I really noticed within myself that my inner critic is the most loud during spring and autumn. Right. So I probably, if someone felt sick, perhaps then the winter phase when you're bleeding, I think that can be, again, it's not necessarily about creating something for the purpose of a product. If we're just looking at really reopening that door and rekindling that creative energy and exploring it, when you're bleeding, you've got the crone archetype to turn to, you know, and she's wise and she's lived through experience. And so any fears that might come up in that time, she's a really powerful energy to turn to basically dispel any naive or any old, you know, insecurities or doubts that might come up. It's also that deeply intuitive, rich time. And so that's, I mean, for me, creativity is essentially just the expression of our soul. Yeah. You know, when I say just, like, it's just, that's all it is. But really, that's all it is.
Yeah, and we're expressing that in every moment, I guess, really, whether it's consciously or unconsciously.
And when we're bleeding, I feel this, and many women tell me this, they feel really deeply connected to themselves when they stop and when they rest and take time out when possible and just give themselves some space to really tune in and to have some time with themselves. That self-connection is the most potent that it can be at any other time in the month. So if we're talking about creativity being soul expression, I mean, we've got like a direct line to our soul, and also in autumn as well, as we're moving into that. So that, I think, would be a very powerful time. And what a beautiful ritual to create for yourself. That when you're bleeding, there's something that you're working on. There's a particular creative project that you're playing with or experimenting with purely for the pleasure.
Yes, not for the end result.
No. Yeah,
and so
exactly.
Also as well, do you think that would be a good time for somebody to explore if they are already trying to work on something, but they might be feeling blocked or stuck?
So this is interesting because I've recently had a lot of block. I've been writing my first book proposal, and I had a lot of blocks come up around this. And so I was experimenting quite a lot with working on it at different phases in the cycle to try to understand how I could best move through it. For me, at the end of the day, it was essentially using everything together, using all of the phases together. Like, there was, when it came to something that I was actually manifesting in the world, I wanted it to be a physical thing. It was about the end result, right? I really needed it to be a finished
and also
product.
You've been given a deadline.
Exactly. And so in that sense, it meant that, okay, I can use that autumn energy for I can't stare at a computer screen when I'm in autumn. I just cannot deal with it at all. But I really love pen to paper writing, and I can actually get quite a lot out. So that meant more pen to paper, sitting in, you know, a cafe or a park somewhere and just letting things come out. Even if they didn't really make any sense, I knew that energy was transient, even if it was a little bit like chaotic, and I could come back to it 2 weeks later and make some sense of it. And so that was really helpful for me to be able to identify, like, okay, I've got quite a rich creativity coming forth. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. I'm probably not going to be typing this up into my computer. However, I can get some gold, basically. Yeah. Winter then was really helpful for sitting with some of the ideas that I had and and not sitting on my computer again either and doing big days at the computer, but it was definitely for getting clear guidance on the direction that I was taking some of this work and being honest with myself, like, how does this feel? And I often get answers in my dreams when I'm bleeding and in the lead up as well. And I'd go to sleep, ask a question like, should I pursue this line of thought, or is this going to work? Does this make sense? And you'd wake up and there it was. The answer was there. So that was really helpful to identify that. And then moving into spring and summer, it was certainly much more than about taking that information and taking that beautiful, rich writing I'd done that made kind of no sense in my autumn, but then, transmuting it into something that actually made sense, typing things into the computer, doing much longer days. Oh man, my most recent summer was some big days at the computer, but I know it was transient, and I had the energy and the resources available to do it. So in that sense, when you are talking about products that you want to manifest in the world, that's, the opportunities to use your menstrual cycle to make it happen are huge.
Yeah, and so no, it's so true. And like you say, knowing that it's just part of a cycle, that it's not going to be the same thing every day for weeks or months, that you're just moving through that process and putting in the effort at a certain time. And so one of the things that I was reading about recently was, I think it was Italy that's looking at introducing some days of leave for women during their menstrual cycle. So what are your thoughts around that? I thought, wow, that's interesting. That would be a big step.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is very interesting. My ex-partner at his workplace in Australia, they actually gave women an extra 12 days of sick leave a year because of their cycle. Yeah. Which, I found fascinating, and I found it very inspiring. And I've had some really great chats with people about this over the last, couple of years, because there are certainly pros and cons to this. The last thing that we want is for women to be looked down upon for their biological functions, as has been the case in history, right? We don't want to go back to that. We've come a long way. And so there's the very real possibility that could happen if this was the case. Could a company then choose a male employee over a female simply because they don't have to grant as much leave? Like, it's, in an ideal world, it sounds great. However, it's not necessarily always going to be the case. Saying that, I think it's wonderful. And I think that what's important is that we look at the menstrual cycle on the whole. So it's not necessarily just about giving menstrual leave because women can't work, in inverted commas, when they're bleeding and they need time off. It's then recognizing, okay, well, let's look at a woman's cycle on the whole. Let's look at how her brain changes and her capabilities and skills shift over the whole cyclic month. And how can we work with that and use it, to be as prolific and as compelling, and to use her to the best of her abilities in a way that's, is sustainable and that feels good for her as well, and benefits everybody. I hope that's where this is moving towards. I just think that with the menstrual leave on its own, it just misses a huge point, but it's definitely I hope a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mean, again, if it's a part of the company's culture and that they are very nurturing and creative and they're looking at a big picture on the whole and how when people are, going to be more productive and that, then that would be fantastic. But as we know, that's not always the case, and there are going to be times where this is going to be used against people. So it's really interesting, and it will be fascinating to see how that evolves and what the flow-on effect of that is, and like in other places, and feedback from women, how they feel about having that extra time and whether they want it. And again, that's gonna vary, isn't it, from person to person?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine going back to work in a corporate environment.
No.
And
not when you've been,
bleeding.
Yeah, that's right. Not when you've been used to sort of being able to kind of organise your days more. I think that's really difficult, actually. And so I was just, on that point, really, if we are having to go into an office every day, for example, for somebody who doesn't have that choice at the moment, how can we structure our days and lives more so that we can be in sync with the cycle, but, at the same time, having to manage multiple responsibilities?
I think what's important is looking at if we can really look at this energy of like the yin and of the yang, and can we approach our day and set an intention, even if we have to go to work, and even if we've got kids and we have these responsibilities. So when we're bleeding and we're in this very yin phase, can we take that energy into our day, and what might that look like? So could that potentially look like putting your phone in another room so that you're not looking at it first thing in the morning, and getting up more slowly? Perhaps it probably means maybe not exercising or not doing anything strenuous, missing your body step class for those first few days, and not exploring that yang energy. And maybe that yin energy then means that you take a lunch break at work and just go and sit on the grass under a tree and read a book, or just meditate, or just chill. Perhaps it means asking your partner, if you have one, for more support around those few days as well, and asking for time out to go and have a bath and relax and read a book, and not place any extra pressure to express any yang external energy if it's not necessary. Sure, there'll be things that you need to go and do, but there's probably a lot that you don't. I think we place so much extra crap into our lives.
It's so self-inflicted, isn't it? So much of the pressure. It really is.
Yes. We're so hard on ourselves, and so often it might just mean, kind self-talk for those few days. If you're in autumn and your productivity levels are different to how they were perhaps 2 weeks ago, and you are feeling a little distracted like I was feeling yesterday, and dissatisfied, just being kind to yourself, and not taking it so seriously, and being gentle with yourself.
That's right. And maybe you don't have to be up until 11 o'clock at night cleaning the bathroom or, all of these things that we suddenly feel that we need to do. Maybe the house can be a mess for a few days.
Oh, look, absolutely. And practical things like pre-cooking food in summer, so that you've got a beautiful stash of food in the freezer that's ready to go when you just cannot be bothered to cook in those autumn and winter phases. Booking a cleaner in for those periods of time, booking a massage in, so that every month at that time, you've got something that is just for you to receive nourishment from somebody else that you can go to after work. There's just things that we can start to do to embed and integrate into our life, so that it just becomes part of how we live.
Yeah.
And so then when you have got more of that really lovely yang energy at other times of the month, then you can really explore that and go to the gym and have big days at the computer and be with people and plan these social occasions. But it probably just means pulling back and saying no, and letting things go at other times of the month.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know that you love music and dancing and like to incorporate those as well at different times in the cycle. And so I was just thinking, for a bit of fun, are you able to share with us like a song or a piece of music that you feel embodies each of the seasons?
Yes. Oh my gosh. For me, music is just such a fun way to express and explore these different energies. And everybody has their own way of connecting with these different phases of the menstrual cycle. Music is definitely an important one for me. So I have a playlist on my Spotify account that I for each season, and I'll put it on the first day of every season, or as I'm moving into a new season, I'll put it on, and it really helps me to feel into it, which is awesome. So I would say for spring, for that spring energy, I would say Work by Rihanna and Drake. That really like high energy, like I put it on and it just makes me want to sit down and work and write and be creative and prolific in that sense. So I love that song, really upbeat. I actually find spring the hardest season to find music for. It's the shortest playlist that I have. I don't know why, but for some reason I find that a difficult season to find music for. which is interesting. Yeah, summer, I have Milkshake. I would have Milkshake by Khalees. My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. I think that is a great one.
Yeah, totally.
Summer. It also applies to that like sex goddess archetype we were speaking about earlier, and anything really like grindy and sexy and fun. I love in my summer. For autumn, I have 1,000 songs. I just love music in this time of my month, in this time of the cycle. I just want to listen to everything. So anything by Alanis Morissette, anything a bit gritty and a bit angsty,
perfect for that.
Yes. Also, I love Bitch by Meredith Brooks, that song.
Yes.
Like the 90s. I always play that really loud when I'm in my autumn.
Your neighbours must love that.
Yeah. It's just perfect. And then for winter, I listen to a lot more the kind of instrumental music in that time of the month, and a more obscure music that I've sort of found on Spotify that I don't know. It is very different. I really want to connect more with less words, just more music. However, I've been listening to a lot of Annie Lennox in that phase, and she's got a really like great energy, I think, for that winter phase as well.
Brilliant. Well, I love that. Well, no doubt people are jumping on Spotify now to find those songs. And I mean, it's a great thing to do, and it's really interesting to find those things that really embody and encapsulate the energy of that, particularly if you're consciously trying to connect with that. So thank you. That's so great. Well, so lovely to talk to you, Claire. And I mean, I know we could talk all day about this because it's just such a rich topic, and there's so multi-layered, and I mean, gosh, so I'll be looking forward to your book coming out so that we can look at all of that in much more detail. But in the meantime, I know you've got your ebook, Adore Your Cycle. And so would you like to share with us your URL where people can find you online?
Absolutely. So if you head to thisislifeblood.com, and you'll be able to find, my Adore Your Cycle ebook is there, as well as a couple of courses that I run a couple of times a year on creativity and the menstrual cycle as well. It's all there.
And there's also, you've got that audio recording as well, which is where you're talking more about the seasons in depth, aren't you, that people can find too?
Exactly. So if you head to the free love section of my website, there's a 90-minute class that I explain everything we've just spoken about, but again, in much more detail for each of the seasons, and that's free to access, and that will give even more insight for anybody who's particularly interested in exploring the seasons and the cycle.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yay, it was really, really wonderful. I could definitely continue to chat all day.
I know.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.